Hi, welcome to this section. So in this section, which is going to be the first section of this particular course, we're going to be getting our hands dirty with Unity. So it's going to be the first section of this course. And well, you know that creating a game is much more than just simulating actions in code. Am I right? Things such as design, story, environment, lighting, and animation, they all play a very important role in setting the stage for your players, and games are basically experiences first and foremost, which code alone cannot deliver. So that's why we have Unity. So with if you could do everything with your code, you don't really need Unity at all. You can just do everything in C sharp, but that's not the case. Unity has placed itself at the forefront of game development over the past decade by bringing advanced tools to programmers and non-programmers alike. So animations and effects, audio, environment setup, and much more are all available directly from the Unity editor without a single line of code. We will be discussing all of these topics as we define the requirements, environments, and the game mechanics of the game that we'll be creating, the game called Hero Born. But to start with, we'll need an introduction to game design and working with game objects. So you were introduced to game objects in the last part of this particular series, in the first part of the course, first course, but you don't really know how that works and how to create them and so on and so forth. We just worked with the main camera last time, remember? So this time around, let's get a proper introduction to the Unity interface as such and how that can help you tremendously in creating your video games, and how even a non-programmer can actually do something worthwhile with Unity in hand. So we'll be talking about a lot of things in this particular section. We'll talk about game design theory, we'll talk about building a level, we'll talk about the game objects and prefabs, and finally lighting basics for your games. So these are the four topics we'll be covering in this particular section. And the next section will be all about animation and particles, but that's for the next one. So let's first look at this. So let's get to the first video then. So in this first video, we'll talk about game design primer, and this is going to be the first video of this particular section. Well, before jumping to any game project, it's important to have a blueprint of what you want to build. Sometimes ideas will start out crystal clear in your mind, but the minute you start creating character classes or environments, things seem to drift away from your original intention. This is where game design allows you to plan out the following things. Now, first off, you need the concept, big picture idea, and the design of a game, including its genre and play style. Then you need the core mechanics. Now, playable features or the interactions that a character can take in game. So that's your core mechanics. Common gameplay mechanics could be jumping, shooting, puzzle solving, or driving. Then there's also your control schemes, a map of the buttons and or the keys that give players control over their character, environment, interactions, and other executable actions. Now that's your control schemes. Then obviously you need a story, which is the underlying narrative that fuels the game, creating empathy and a connection with the players and the game world that they're playing in. This is very important. Players need a story. They need a story to get behind. They need to know why they are shooting at the enemies, so to speak. And of course, you need to decide on the art style. The game's, which is basically the game's overarching look and feel, consistent across everything from the characters and the menu art to the levels and environments. So, now that's your art style. So the win-lose conditions are basically the rules that govern how the game is won or lost, which usually consists of the objectives or the goals that carry the weight of potential failure. For example, if they get shot, right? If they get shot, they lose 10% of their health. If they get shot 10 times, they lose the life. And how many lives they have and how many lives they can lose before they lose the game, and what they need to do to win the game. Or, sometimes in games where there's a world to build in, there's probably no win condition at all. There's just leveling up. So there's a lot of levels to go up. So how the leveling up happens, what's the goal they need to reach to level up, and things like that. So these topics are by no means an exhaustive list of what goes on into designing a game, but it's a good place to start with. So these are a good place to start fleshing out something called a game design document, which is what we're going to be looking at next. So it's a game design document. If you Google out game design document, you'll see literally a flood of templates, formatting rules, and content guidelines that can leave a new programmer ready to give it all up. Now, even if you know programming, this is still not something you might be familiar with, because Unity is not something you're familiar with, right? So the truth is, designing your documents, it's up to you. So design documents are tailored to the team or the company, or in your case, probably an individual gamer or game programmer, okay? So it's tailored to the person who's creating the game. So it's much easier if you think about it from that aspect. So it's much easier to make them, to draft them, than the internet would have you think. So don't worry about that. So generally, there are three kinds of documents that you can create. The first one is your game design document, GDD. Now this houses everything from how the game is played to its atmosphere, its story, and the experience it's trying to create. So depending on the game, this document can be either a few pages or several hundreds even. Now, in our case, we're going to be creating a very simple game for this particular course. So if you were to create a game design document for it, and I encourage you to do that, so I encourage you to actually create a GDD for the game that we'll be creating right now. So maybe have this as a homework or something like that. And you'll notice that there's not a lot to talk about because it's a very simple game. But there are games with an entire world built into it, multiplayer games that host millions of players online, and those games, of course, they need documents that go beyond hundreds of pages. And then there is your technical design document, and this document focuses on all the technical aspects of the game, from the hardware it will run on to how the classes and program architecture need to be built out, and so on and so forth. Just like the GDD, the length will vary based on the project. And again, in our case, it's going to be a much smaller document than the other real world documents, for example. And finally, you have the one page. We will be looking at a one page for our game. Now, this is usually used for marketing or promotional situations. A one page is essentially a snapshot of your game. As the name suggests, it should just be a single page. Okay? So the game we'll be working on throughout the rest of this course is quite simple, and it won't require anything. Actually, even if you write a GDD or a TDD for it, TDD is technical design document for it, it won't be much, it won't be quite big. So in fact, you can just not have a GDD or TDD written for this, and it will be fine as well. So it's that simple. But we will be looking at a one page to keep track of our project objectives and some background information. Okay, so I want to tell you something before we move on to the next part. There is no right or wrong way to format a GDD. So it's a good place to let your personal brand of creativity thrive. So don't go looking for templates. Just start writing stuff out. It's everything in your mind has to go into a document. That's all a GDD is. And while you're developing the game, you just come and reference the GDD to make sure that you've covered everything that you wanted to cover, that your game does what your GDD prescribes that it should do. Okay, and of course, throw in pictures of reference material that inspire you. Get creative with the layout, that's all I'm telling you. And finally, let's look at our Hero Born one page, okay, to keep us on track going forward in this course. Now there is this, I've put together this simple document that lays out the basics of the great game prototype. So read through it before moving on and try to start imagining some of the programming concepts we've learned so far being put into place in here. I mean, the C# concepts that we learned in the last course, try to put that inside of this, instead of the objectives that we are describing in this particular page. So try to put in the C# concepts that we've learned in our course so far, in the last course so far. So try to put that inside of this document, inside of all of the objectives that I'll be specifying for this particular game. So just try imagining that. Now the concept of this game is quite simple. The game prototype as such, it's focused on stealthily avoiding enemies and collecting health items. Okay, that's it. That's the entire focus of this game. So you're going to collect health items while avoiding enemies, or while if you come across them, you have to fight with them, obviously. So that's the concept of this game. As far as the gameplay is concerned, the main mechanic centers around using the line of sight to stay one step ahead of your patrolling enemies and collecting the required items, which are the health items as I just said. And the combat situations will consist of shooting projectiles at your enemies, which will automatically trigger an attack response. So if you get shot, you lose health, obviously. So you'll have to shoot at your enemies, kill them, and get your items. But generally try to avoid them as well. And then there is the interface. Now the control scheme for movement will be your WASD keys in your keyboard, right? So W, A, S, and D for movements, just like you do with your games, like up, right, down, and left. Up, left, down, and right. Okay, and then there's your arrow keys. Now that's very easy to understand. So you know the keys, and the keys are it's the same keys for your movements. So you can use them for movement of your character, and you can use the mouse for the camera control. And shooting mechanic will use the space bar, and item collection will work off of object collisions. So if when you collide with a particular object, you'll collect it. It's as simple as that. And there's also going to be a simple display, HUD. We'll talk about that. So there'll be a simple display which it'll show the items collected and the remaining ammunition, as well as the standard health bar, and so on and so forth. Okay, so very simple interface. Finally, the art style. Now the level and character art style will be, it'll all be just primitive game op that we are taking off of Unity, and we'll have a very fast and efficient no frills development that way. Now these can be swapped out at a later date with 3D models of terrain and environments if needed. Okay, so that's the entirety of our game. So that's it for this particular lesson. And now you have a very basic idea of what we'll be creating and how to get started with your game. So basically we've looked at game theory as such, right? So let's look at the next lesson where we'll look at building a level. I'll see you there. Thank you.